Good afternoon, everyone. Dear authors and invited guests, welcome to Technical Session 1C. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the 6th International Conference on ICT for Sustainable Development through Zoom on behalf of ICT Forestry and Global Knowledge Research Foundation. We are thankful to everyone present on this platform to go along with us digitally for the conference in these unpredictable times. Also wish everyone and their families protected time and we all together will pass this soon. I hope you will enjoy the 2 days of this conference. Before we start the session, I just would like to introduce the session chair. Uh, just a minute. Narendra sir. Narendra sir is presently working as Associate Professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering. He has completed his BE from Amravati University in 2000, followed by MTech and PhD. He has 14 years of rich experience of academics and research. He has published more than 120 articles in recognized journals, conferences, and books. His main areas of research include medical signal and image processing, biomedical instrumentation, speech signal processing, biometrics, intelligent healthcare, brain computer, and etc. He has been awarded by organizations like Taiwan Society of Ultrasound and Medicine, Ultrasonic Society of India, and NIT Raipur. He is an active member of different recognized societies from areas of research, including senior membership of IEEE. Thank you for your presence, sir.
Thank you, Deepika.
Thank you. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, so we'll begin with our first presentation. It's Yashdeep. Yashdeep, I have unmuted you. Yashdeep,
Yeah. Hello.
are you
Can
able
you
to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. So you can begin with your presentation. You have 8 minutes to complete your presentation and 2 minutes for question and answers. I will give you time check on the 7 minutes of the presentation. So please keep that in mind. And I request all the participants to be on mute while the presentation is going on. If any questions are there, you can drop in the public chat forum and then question. Yeah, thank you. So you can begin with the presentation, Yash. You're able to hear me, right? Everything
Yes,
is
I can hear you. Yeah. So are you able to see the screen?
Yes. Your screen is visible.
Okay.
You can start.
Okay. So hi everyone. I am Yashdeep, expert hardware board design engineer from Infineon Technologies. I specifically belong to the automotive microcontroller department, and my team is BDE, which stands for board design engineering. So what my team does is we make hardware validation platforms enabling different teams within Infineon and outside Infineon to carry out validation of silicon and different IPs present in it, like your SPC, CAN, I2C, SPI, CENT, like that. So what I mean by a validation platform is it is nothing but hardware boards like the PCB, the printed circuit boards that you see around. So that is what we design for the different teams. So I'll just let you know how. Yeah. So if you look at the left hand side of the slide, so this is one of the validation platforms which is called a Rovax board. So you won't find it online. I mean, even if you search it out, you won't find it because it's internal board. So I'll tell you the specific functionalities. So at the center here, you'll find that this is where we'll place in our silicon. And since that is a BGA package, so all its pinouts are exposed outside in these particular connectors. To power up this particular board, we have 42 into 40 pin connectors to provide power, and few SMA jacks here as well to provide clock. So anyone of you who is working at in the microcontroller environment will know that to function for a particular microcontroller to function, there are two requirements. One is the power and the second is clock. For our own Infineon's IC or a silicon, so basically we have to give the silicon three power sources. I mean, like 5 volt, 3.3 volt, and 1.25 volt for the core. So this is how we provide it. So basically, on the right hand side, you'll see the basic power setup for validation. So suppose you're a test engineer, you want to validate a particular IP or something. So you need two bench power supplies. Each will have two different channels. From there, you'll provide 3.3 volt and 5 volt to one of the connectors and 1.25 core voltage to another connector. Also, you'll require a function generator to provide 20 megahertz to a silicon in any one of these SMA connectors. So this is the basic setup that you need to do always. Right. So what our problem statement was, since we are going into a era of automation, so we wanted to automate the whole validation process. Now, when I say a validation process, I'm not talking about validating a particular IP. So I'm not talking about teams which are who are validating a CAN or I2C or SPI. I'm talking about the PVTF conditions. So since there's a time constraint, I won't go into the depth of things. So for that, you can read the paper. So it will have the whole definition of the PVTF. So we wanted a methodology which should be cost efficient, scalable, should be applied for the future generations of silicon as well, and the power and clock requirements. So when I say PVTF, P stands for process, V for voltage, T for temperature, and F for frequency. So every time there is a guy who is manually changing the frequency and the temperature and the voltage. Okay, so that you have a particular silicon, you have a particular board, you power it up. So now the core voltage takes in 1.25 volt. But now you want to validate or now I want to check it out at 1.2 volts. What happens if we provide 1.2 volts or 1.15 or 1.1 volts to the core and see if my particular silicon is working fine or not. So this is what um, robustness validation engineer will do, manually changing the power and the clock as well as temperature. But here we are focusing on the power and clock requirements. So as a solution, we came up with two boards, namely I2C switch board, switcher board, and the power supply board. So this is how we have named it. So I'll go into the depth. So the first one is the I2C switcher board. We often call it as the master board. This is because the whole concept works on the PM bus architecture. So PM bus is nothing but the I2C bus. Anyone of you who has been working I mean, in the semiconductor industry would know what I2C protocol is. So when the I2C bus is used for power management, so it is called the PM bus. So this is working, the whole architecture is working on the PM bus. So on the right hand side, you see that there's a host PC. So in this I2C switcher board, there's a USB cable, so we can connect this particular board to the host PC. Then there is a FTDI chip, which converts your USB protocol to UART FIFO. And then there is this little guy here, which is nothing but bidirectional translating switches. And in our case, we have 8 of these switches, each ending with a I2C header. Now this header is nothing but a 4-pin connector with 2 pins grounded, and the 2 is SCL and SDA for the clock and the data. So this is how the switcher board is. The next board, what I want to show you is the power supply board. We often call it as a slave board, but because it consists of all the slave devices. So the beginning of the board, the data comes into this I2C header, which connects to one of the 8 switches, one of the 8 these I2C headers anywhere. So this one connects to that switcher board. Now these are my SCL and SDA lines and all the slave devices. One of the prominent slaves are my PMIC. So this is a Texas Instruments TPS 5600. So this is a power management IC. So it has got 4 channels, and we have used 3 channels for our ROVAX. So one of the channels will work at 1.25 volts, the other one at 5, and the next one will at 3.3 volts. And each of them is can be varied with, I mean, we can change the VREF values and change its output voltages at the same time. Another important slave device is the clock generator. So it has got 8 outputs, 3 of them working at 5 volts, and 5 of them working at 3.3 volts. And each of these particular channels can be varied from 2.5 kilohertz to 200 megahertz. And again, it can be controlled by I2C lines. We also have 2 current sensors to measure how much current a particular voltage rail is consuming. We also have a LCD just to show how much current how much current it is taking, to show it on the LCD. So it's a 16 cross 2 LCD we have put in here. So this was about the power supply board. So how it works. So the full system integration is something like this. So you have a host PC here. You will connect your host PC, a particular port of your laptop or your PC to I2C master switchboard. Then this master switchboard will have eight channels. Each channel will connect to your power supply board, and each power supply board will connect indeed to your particular rovax board. Right. So suppose you are a test engineer, or you are a validation engineer, and you're working from home, you're working from your lab anywhere, and you just want to change your core voltage from 1.25 volt to 1.3 volt in a rovax board 2, suppose. So you just write a Python code, send the data via the FTDI to this letter guy here. Since it is a Rovax board 2, so you will tell this guy, okay, disable all the switches, but switch number 2. So the data will flow to your power supply board 2, and this will contain all your slave devices. You'll have all the slave addresses. You ping a particular guy. In our example, you ping the PMEC. The PMEC will acknowledge you back. Now you communicate with it, change the VREF value, and hence you'll change the voltage that has been given to the Rovax board 2. So this is how the whole data flow will happen.
So Yash, sorry
So
for the
before
interruption. You just have 2 minutes to go. So
okay,
just end up with your presentation.
yeah. So before going into the benefits, I would want you to see on the left-hand side. So this is how the whole setup looks like. So this is the photos from our Infineon for validation lab. So people have been using it. And like I said, since we needed 30 Rovax board for our setup, so one Rovax board required 2 bench supplies, so in total 60. And like I said in the beginning, that the cost of the bench supplies is 1100 euros. So the total cost came out to be around 68,509 euros. And the total cost of the whole power supply board and the switcher board is 23,000 of the 30 power supply board and 8 switcher board. And that includes the effort cost as well. So the total cost saving in our case came out to be 45,000 euros, which in IR terms is around 35 to 40 lakhs. So this is the cost saving we did. And if you look at the graph here, so the more you scale this up, the more cost saving it will be for you guys. So that's it from my side. In case you want to go into the technical details of what are the ICs that we have used and what are the calculations we did for a particular resistors or capacitor settings, it is there in the paper. So that's it from my side. If you have any questions, feel free. I'll answer.
Participants are requested to put up the questions in the question box, the text box.
Any questions?
I think no question is coming up. Yes, Yashdeep, this is Dr. Londe. Yes, congratulations for such a good architecture that you have designed and implemented, and which has really given you the good reduction in the cost of the other available switches in the market. Yes, I have just one question regarding your this device, this architecture. How the data transfer rate has been handled, or it has been tackled while designing this?
Okay, so the data transfer will effectively decrease since my data my data jumps from one board to another. So if you look at the whole architecture, so my PC is sending the data to my switcher board. From that switcher board, my data has to travel to my power supply, and from the power supply to my Rovax, my end solution, right? So the data transfer has been significantly decreased. So there has to be a downfall with everything, right? So if you are trying to save, money in this case, so the data transfer has been decreased in this case, yeah. So if you look at the architecture clearly, so there has been, we have placed just before the jump, just before connectors we have placed in the I2C buffer, which boosts my signal as well as keep the data going in the same. I mean, if it is 400 kilohertz or the different, depending on the different I2C standards, if it is 400 kilohertz or it is 800 or 1 Mbps as well. So we have checked it out at 400 and 800, it works well. At 1, so there is some attenuation because it is a physical wires and not the PCB routing, because once you jump from one board to another, so it is I mean, we have to connect it via wires, right? So that is where the attenuation takes place right now. So at 1 Mbps, it is difficult. For 400 kbps and 800 kbps, we are able to do it.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Deep. Thank you so much for nice presentation.
Thank you.
Deepika, you can call the next.
Yes.
one.
Our next presenter is Harshit. Harshit Madan.
Hello.
Yes. Are you able to hear me right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. You can just full screen. You can share your screen. I'm able to view your screen as well. Yes, better. You can start with the presentation.
Okay. So my presentation is on the vulnerability due to the training on split learning. So first of all, before talking about what split learning is and other learning methods, talking about this issue, first let's talk about what are these methods. Okay, so first, what is distributed deep learning? So when in the healthcare sector, what happens is you can't share the hospitals, they can't share their data with each other. There are specific laws that don't allow them to share the patient's data. And so if we have a neural network, the more data that we have, the better it is going to be. So ideally we would want them to share it, but government has specific laws and laws for the privacy, to preserve the privacy of the patients. So now this is where distributed deep learning comes in. What happens in this is it allows multiple hospitals to train the data without actually sharing the raw data. And this will help in protecting the patient's privacy. And how, so there are three methods to do distributed deep learning. The first one is predicted learning, second is split learning, and the third one is split fed learning. So this paper is mainly focused on split learning and the downfall it has and how we can mitigate the problems. So let's first talk about all the learnings there are. So first of all, there is federated learning. It was introduced by a team at Google, led by McMahon. And so what happens here is, so there are hospitals. Let me just get a pointer on my screen. Yes. So let's say there are hospitals and hospitals. Let's just say there are 3 hospitals in my loop that wants to train their data together. So what is going to happen is hospital 1. So there is going to be a model. We are going to set a model. Let's say we have a DenseNet model. And what we are going to do is we are going to send that model to hospital 1. The hospital 1 is going to train the model on its data, and after training the model, it is going to send all the parameters to the server and the weights and biases. And the server receives the weights and biases from hospital 1. Hospital 2 is also going to train the model, and it is also going to send its weights and parameters to the server. And just like that, each and every hospital in the loop is going to send back the weights. What is the server now is going to aggregate all these weights that it got from these hospitals, and it is going to average them out. And the final version of the model, it is going to spit out after averaging is going to be called the global model. And this is going to be our new trained model. So in this way, what happened was the hospitals did not share the raw data of their patients. They simply shared the weights and biases that they got from training. So that's why there is no explicit sharing of raw data in the setup. And now moving on to split learning. So what happens in split learning is, so if I have a model, let's say again DenseNet model, and it has, let's just focus on the, let's say any model, let's say there are just 5 layers in that model, 5 convolution layers simply. So what is going to happen in split learning is there is a part of the network that is going to reside on the client side, on the clients, and the other part is going to be at the server. So what happens here is that the client, it has the data, it is going to train the first few layers of its of the network, and then it is going to give the activations that of the last layer to to help the forward propagation of the loop. So, and this way, when it receives these, and there is going to be a forward propagation and also a backward propagation. Now this is going to share the gradients that it got during backward propagation. Server is going to share it with the client. So this way, a whole model is trained, and in this method, what happens is, you didn't here also you didn't share the raw data. You actually shared the activations of a particular layer, and you received some gradients from the server. And there is this is called the vanilla configuration for split learning. There is one more configuration out there, and that is going to be a U-shaped configuration. In this case, as you can see, the last layer resides on the server side. So what happens is, now the hospitals, they don't want to share the labels as well. Why would they want to minimize the sharing as much as possible? So what happens is, we can put this last layer back to the client. So there are first few layers to the client, then it's going to send the activations to the server, and then the server has the middle layers, and then the server is going to send the activation back, and then the last few layers are going to train back on the client. So this way, one loop of training happens, and there is also backward propagation, and the model trains like that. So in this way, this is how training happens in split learning. And so this is a sequential training. So hospital one is going to train with my server. Then after hospital one trained, then hospital 2 is going to train with the server, then hospital 3, and like that. So this is a sequential training. Whereas in the case of federated learning, server can give the model to all the hospitals that are in the loop, and they are going to do the training on their own time, and they are going to give back to the server. And at the end, the server aggregates out. So this is more of a parallel training. But in this case, it's a sequential training. And so what are the benefits of split learning over federated learning? So as you can see, the client only trains few layers. So the computation that is required on the client side is very less, whereas most of the computation happens on the client side in federated learning, and only aggregation happens on server. So if our clients have very bad PCs, so this way we can help them by using split learning. And so yeah, this was the split learning. And then there is a third one, that is split fed learning, which will be cleared in this figure. So what happens in split fed learning is basically, so what you got from split learning, so the model trains here, and so there is one model that so the server is going to train with hospital 1. Server is going to keep a copy of that aside. Then server 2 is going to train with hospital 2. This also, another copy is going to be kept aside. And this way, all these copies are going to be aggregated out at the end, averaged out.
Sorry for the interruption, Ashit. We just have
Yes.
a minute to go, so kindly conclude.
Okay. So the problem. So let's talk about the problem in split learning. So what happens is, due to the cyclic training, when I have a known ID data set, the more known ID the data is going to be, or the more number of institutes there are in my cycle, the model is going to change so drastically that it might forget what it has learned from the beginning. So there might be a drop of performance for the clients that are in the beginning. And in split federated learning, as it is parallel training, there is no degradation like that. In split fed learning, there is also an average out, so there is no degradation. And this is what we are going to prove. So we took the data set that we have was from 5 sources. We divided the data set into 5 clients, and there was also a test data set. Test data set had a prevalence of 10%. So we used PySift to do all these experiments, and a binary cross entropy function was used, and 10 epochs was run, and the best validated model was saved for evaluation. And these were the results that we got. So in results part 1, what we did was, in a loop, let's say A, B, C, D is the loop, A, B, C, D, E. So we run the loop, and we calculated all the metrics for client A, and then we reversed client A's position to the end, and then we also we calculated again all the values of client A. So what happened was, we received a drop in each of the metrics for split learning, whereas no drop was observed for federated learning and split fed learning and federated learning. And in the part 2 of results, what we did was, we sequentially add more and more clients to our training loop, because we wanted to show that as more and more the clients there are going to be, the more is degradation of performance there is going to be. So what happens in this is, in the first client session there are 2 clients, and here again client A's performance metrics are calculated, and like that we calculate all these values, and what we saw was, there was an increase in the performance drop for a client in split learning, whereas there was no performance drop observed in federated learning and split fed learning. So yeah, and as you can see in the graph as well. So yeah, that concludes my presentation. So
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sir, any questions?
Yes, Harshit.
yes, sir.
Nice to see your presentation. Harshit, there is a very popular method is there in the literature that is called as ensemble learning, which is very similar to what you are describing here. Okay.
Yes, sir.
One thing that I want to ask you, at the server, when you are taking the parameters of your every network from the hospitals,
Yes.
what is the way to add up those parameters? Is it something weighted addition or direct addition, or what you're doing exactly?
Direct averaging of the parameters, sir.
Direct averaging. Okay,
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Okay, Harshit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harshit.
How do I
Over to you.
stop sharing the screen? I can't see.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Done?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. We can mute yourself now. So our next presenter is Aridham Singh. Yes, I have unmuted you. Aridham Singh.
Yes.
Yeah. Please start sharing your screen. Please remember, you just have 8 minutes to complete your presentation. So go accordingly, so that when we have the other presenters left and we have back-to-back sessions, so we don't want to miss all that. So please kindly make a note of the time as well.
Okay.
So you can start with the presentation. I'm able to see your screen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arindam Singh. I am going to present my paper that was on a machine learning approach for the gate-based human authentication in smart cities. The content we are going to cover in this slide are introduction, literature survey, proposed work, performance evaluation, conclusion and future scope, reference. Let me introduce our topic. The identification of the human being from their movement is a biometric technology which have the power of identifying the pupil even farther away. His face is visible or covered or hidden in the camera in dark places. In this paper, we have devised the supervised machine learning techniques for the classification of the image. We have tested our method on the ASIA-B dataset, which is available in the public domain. It consists of 124 subject. We have found our method is outperforming in the existing schemes, and the human authentication is required for enhancing the security in the airports, shopping malls, organization, banks, military, etc. These are the overview of our topic. How our gate-based model can be implemented in the smart city. These are the high security zone area on which we can implement this method. These are the methods by which we can implement the gate based approach. That one is the model based method and the other is the motion based method. Model based is the mathematical computational method, and the motion based is required the sequence of images for extracting the feature from these images. And these are the applications of from where we can implement our gateways method then in surveillance system and providing the security in the smart cities and in sports mainly and the healthcare sector. That these are the characteristics of our system. That we have compared the gate-based biometric techniques like iris and the finger-based. We have found that the gate identification have following advantages. It does not require the user communication and it can be done at the distance as long as the gate appear. These are the issues and challenges that we have faces. Now we are seeing the cities are moving toward the smart era, so they require some efficient technique for enhancing the securities in the cities. These are the motivation why we chooses this topic, as we are seeing the criminal investigation for the smart cities is a challenge, so we require the method which enhance the security. Coming on to the problem statement, as we are seeing that we designed a gateways authentication system for providing the security in the smart city by using the machine learning approach. And these are the literature survey we have go through these 16 paper, and after that we have found that the methods which are using SVM and the neural network for the classification have the higher precision and the accuracy as compared to the others. And this is the proposed work that we are proposing. The here we are taking the input as a human gate frame, and pre-process them, and then we reduce the feature by using the PCA and extract the features, and then to train that feature to the database. And after that we have test our method mm, in the real-time environment. So we have found that if our method can identify the person, then we can say that person got authenticated, else we can say that the person is unknown. Mm, Coming into the procedure, what we have done, the capture the image with the help of camera, and the pre-process the image. Pre-processing of the image is done, and then extract the feature from the image, then train that feature to the database, apply the classification technique for extracting the result. And in the pre-processes we have done the three things, that the resizing of the image and the noise reduction and then segmentation of the image. These are the algorithm for the pre-processing. And after the pre-processing we get the Silhouette image, and that for the feature reduction we use PCA, which provide the efficient and the decrease the computational time and by achieving the higher accuracy. And for the extracting the feature, we have divided the human body into two parts, upper and the lower. Upper part consists of head, neck, shoulder and torso, and the lower part consists of hip, knees and ankle, foot. That we are coming to the feature selection, where we have taken the step size, the dimension of the human Silhouette and joint angle. A joint angle we are going to cover are these: the head, neck, torso and the right hip and thighs, left hip and thighs, lower right leg and the lower left leg. And these are the joint angle measurement. By with the help of gradient distance transform, we identify the critical points in the foreground of image. These are the algorithm for the skeletonization process. And these are coming to the performance and evolution. These are the data set we have uses that was available in the public domain. These are the metrics that we have covered, this confusion metrics for and these are the accuracy, precision, recall and the F1 score. And these are the results we have got in for the confusion matrix, that where we have 86 subjects is used for the training and 36 left for the testing, where we found that the 87 subject out of 88 it is predicted correct and one predicted wrong, while out of 36 one is wrongly predicted that was not available in the database. And these are the results and discussion. We have got the accuracy of 98.38 and the precision score that 8 98.86 and the recall 98.86 and alpha score 98.86. And when we compare our method with the existing technology that we have found that if we use PCA for reducing the features and SVM for the classification, then it shows the better result as compared to other techniques. And these are the some researches that we have compared with this, where we found our method is giving the better result. And let me conclude our topic, and that the method that we are proposing is a efficient method and outperforming in the existing scheme. In the terms of accuracy, the accuracy of our scheme is observed at 98.38. The method that we have proposed is efficient and easy to implement in smart cities for the person authentication. In future, we can test our scheme for the various data sets on the various performance matrices, and furthermore, we can implement this uh, using different algorithm for the classification in the different conditions. These are the references that we have taken for this paper. Thank you. Any
Yes,
question?
Arindam.
जी sir.
Nice presentation on gate analysis. Right? Arindam,
जी sir.
one thing is there in this. If you see now, people have moved from conventional machine learning to the deep learning, right?
Yes sir.
Are you hearing me?
Yes sir.
Yes. Yes. People
Yes.
have moved from conventional machine learning to the deep learning now, right?
Yes sir.
So, how good it is to work in this era with the conventional machine learning? That is what you have proposed in your method.
Yes sir.
What do you think about it?
So if we test on the deep learning method, we also get some better efficiency. And here we have also found that if we use this approach and by the help of PCA, we reduce the reduce the features, and then we if apply SVM for the classification, then we also getting the achieving the higher accuracy.
No, for comparison, you have used CNN, I think, right?
No, sir, we have used
If you are able to
SVM and PCA combination.
PC, SVM and PC, right?
Yes, sir.
If you want to use deep learning architecture, this
Yes, sir.
Kasia dataset will be good enough. You have to be even give larger data set.
Yes, sir. In future, we can also try on that. We can
Right.
implement our
Okay,
scheme.
thank you, Arindam. Thank you for
Thank you,
joining
sir.
us today.
Thank you.
Over to the
Yes. Our next participant is Amit Sutar. Yeah, I have unmuted you.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. You can start sharing your screen, please.
Yeah. Is it visible to all of you?
Yes, 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 yes. You can begin.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Amit Suthar from Ganpat University Faculty of Computer Application, Gujarat. Today, I'm going to present over here technical analytical study to forecast the buy-sell signal to determine investment strategy for maximize the return on investment. So basically, this is the problems regarding the uh, share market. So the motive behind the investigation is to figure out the base or database from the Nifty 50. And my main thing find out the using various indicator like MACD, that is the moving average convergence divergence. Then after BB, that is the Bollinger Band, and RSI, that is the relative strength index. So we know that the share market is the full of uncertain and speculation market. So no one can lose their money, wants to lose their money all of the guys wants to invest properly on a particular uprising or uptrend stock market. So we are basically finding the technical analytical study to forecast whether the stock is going to buy or not. So such kind of signals can be generated through the signals through the indicator, market indicator like MACD, BB, and RSI. So here I have provided some study regarding this. In this examination, significant as the discoveries can be utilized by financial specialist, choice broker, and portfolio manager, or we can say portfolio administrator, to get create beneficial exchanging signal and acquire the great danger to compensate proportions. So in each stock market, speculation directors are confronted with the decision to purchase or sell share. So technical examination comprises of different pointers to help dynamic with few classification of markers. A few classes of pointers are pointers to decide patterns to use to decide if commercial circumstances are in uptrend or downtrend. So the pointer class used to decide the signal when purchasing and retailing as an oscillator marker. So by investigation, we found these three indicators are very much helpful for the investment to see if one can show solid access and in settling on a choice to buy or sell as part in the financial exchange. To see if MACD, moving average convergence divergence, can show a solid and precise sign in setting on buy or sell choice, as well as RSI is there, relative strength index. So by mixing of these three pointers, we can have a good condition for purchase or sell a stock, or generate a buy or sell signal for the trading. So this exploration is required to valuable for brokers as information and assessment of interest in dividends. The current examination is relied upon to give the study material and contribution to future analysts who need to look at similar article and subjects. So basically, MACD is what? So MACD, moving average convergence divergence, is finding the some mathematical formulation like it is used to EMA. EMA is nothing but exponential moving average. So we are finding the 26 days, that is the approximate 1 month EMA and 1 month EMA and 7-day EMA. So we are finding the difference in between these 26 days EMA and 7 days EMA, and finding the middle point. Then after 14-day exponential moving average depicted on MACD head. So there are findings with the MACD can generate buy and sell signal when such MACD line exceeds the signal line, a purchase indicator appears. That means buying signal is appeared. When the MACD value passes beneath, that means it is crossing down the signal line, then it is supposed to be a sell signal, or we can say it's a trade signal. So MACD provides the exceed the signal line, then it is generate the buy signal. And if it is going down or crossing beneath the signal line, then it is supposed to be a trade signal, that is the sell signal. So proposed model is using the MACD, then after Bollinger Band as well as RSI, So when using the Bollinger Band, you will get a channel with the upper, lower, and center Bollinger Band. So again, there is a mathematical formulation for the finding the upper bound, then upper band, lower band. So upper band is nothing but again, it's a exponential moving average of a given period of time, and added with the stochastic oscillator. And stochastic oscillator is nothing but a momentum indicator, which comparing a particular closing price of a security or of a share to a range of its price over a certain period of time. So by gaining the upper bound, lower bound, then after there is a stochastic oscillator. So lower bound can be found by subtracting the stochastic oscillator from the EMA of given period. So through that, we are finding the Bollinger Band also. And it is up to the 100%, 0 to 100%. So in the event that it close to 0%, at that point, it is named as close to base level. And if it is close to 100%, then it is named as most significant level. So it provides the upper band as well as lower band. And the value channels are the standard deviation of the stock being considered, and the middle line is an EMA. So this is the Bollinger Band, and at last there is a RSI, relative strength index, is a momentum indicator used to technical analysis that measures the magnitude of the recent price changes to evaluate overbought or oversold. So RSI is providing us the whether the stock price is in the market is whether the overbought or oversold. So-
Sorry for the interruption, Amit. Just conclude with your presentation. We
Yeah,
just
sure,
have a
sure,
minute.
sure. So I have implemented this model with this generating the buy sell signal using the combination of RSI, MACD, and Bollinger Band, and through that I get the sheet for the particular stock market. For the particular here I have provided the symbol, that is the Reliance, and you can see in the output there is a signal called a buy, or we can say here the sell signal. So each and every day the model is going to evaluate the script and generate the buy sell signal. So this is the particular 5 stocks here I have been shown over here. That is the all mostly coverage of the sector. There is a Cipla. So blue signal is generated for the buy signal, and red signal is generated for the selling signal. So our Cipla stock is going to be like this is the buy signal. At that time, you can buy the Cipla stock. At this point of also, the buy signal is generated, and over this period, you can get the sell signal. So always buy at lower price and sell at higher price. So you will get definitely benefited in this stock market investment. Okay, so Dr. Reddy is there. Then after Reliance is there. So over here you can see the buy signal is generated continuously. Here is also, and at the peak time there is sell signal is generated. So one can get the maximize the ROI by on that particular investment. So SBIN is there, ECS is there. So that is the output of this particular, and my studies conclusion is the Bollinger Band pointer and RSI is more effectively spotting the sell signal, and MACD perform was overly slow in catching the buy and sell signal when compared to Bollinger Band and RSI. So, this is from my side. Yes, these are the various. Yes, sir.
Yes, participants can also ask the question. If they have any question, please drop it in the chat box. Yes, Mr. Sudhar, I am really happy to see your this work, because this is something which is the need of our, right? Buy and sell signal. You are generating buy
Thank
and
you
sell
very much,
signal,
sir.
and as you are from Gujarat, you are most fascinated. I feel that from the share market. One thing is very important, sir, that whatever your this prediction model is there, it is learning for one particular company. Means you are training it for one particular company's data set for its previous data. Okay, prior knowledge is given for one company only.
Okay.
Right? Isn't there any
Yes.
possibility that the rate of any share is going to be affected not only because of some other circumstances like political situation or some things in the money market where actually the rupee dollar ratio, if that is changing, that may also affect the price of the share, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. It can be affect whether the over the globe share market situation. Then after, if there is a war situation, then again it affect the share market, as well as crude price is also there. So all kinds of parameter can be affected in this buy sell signal.
Right.
Definitely.
So with the prior knowledge, with all that parameters can also be included, I think.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhar.
Thank you
really
very
nice
much.
presentation from you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Over to Deepika.
Yes, yes. Our next presenter is Sachi Gawai. I've asked you to unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself and share your screen.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I'm able to see your screen. You can begin with the presentation. Please remember, you just have 8 minutes. So please go accordingly. Yeah. Thank you. Please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sachi. I'm the main author of this paper that I'm presenting. My co-authors are Dr. Jyotsna Dongadeve and Mrs. Pallavi Chatfule. We are here to present the paper which is called as Multi-Electoral ICT Application Towards a Sustainable Rural India. Now, here we have as you can see, we have the outlines of background, use of technical tools, the initiatives, and the comparative study of those initiatives. Now, as far as an information technology in agriculture, it is rising fast, and it can give an exact data essential for farmers, which will be worked better and better in the coming period. Now, the farmers, they more to admittance this agriculture data has been charged on account of quick system. So to create those system, ICT tools have been major use. Now, these tools affect a lot in productions, like in weathers, in the machinery technologies, the parameters, and other external factors. The major technologies that play in a role are design and improvement, assessment in decimating, and even check the attitude of those rural communities. Now, as we come across the ICT, there are specific tools which we came across are helping the farmers and the urban people to connect. These were mobile apps, their message service like M-Kisan. There were call centers like Tata from Tata Consultancies, the e-forecasting news, social media helps a lot, the agricultural e-learning, web portals. These all are the major factors that we came across in this paper. Our main paper's aim was to analyze the basic needs of farmer that connects. As we know, a farmer is not that literate enough to understand understand the basic needs of an agriculture expertise. So here, these are the major tools that a farmer and any investment, a cooperative sector or domain can connect. as we come across, these are the applications where we put across. Now there are different players or different domains that stress upon the farmers' utility. These players can be the government, that is the public sector, some cooperative sectors or banks that we say, that funds private entities like Tata, Varna Limited, NGOs. These all help a lot in the agricultural sectors. Now there is also a factor known as time, where accuracy is also important. How accurate these tools are able to help the farmers. Uh, After this, the decimation of this information. How good, how particular, and how precisely is the information given to the farmers. So as we come across through this presentation, we basically came across three sectors: public, private, and NGO. In public, the major stress is been given upon the quantity of crops that they yield, or the pesticides that the farmers need. These are few domains which help the farmers. One of the top three are AgriNet, Digital Green, and iKisan. Now, iKisan is is very prior and is very authentic website or a call center that helps 24/7 farmers by toll-free calls, and it helps to educate them. Then is the digital green. It is a e-learning site where digital videos have been shown to them in panchayat or to any other common developing areas. Then there is AgriNet too. Now there comes the public sectors. Now the public sectors also controls of agra market, as I say. uh, Agra market basically focuses on the stock market price, which crops will be the yielding for better for the next year, for this year. So it grades, it standardizes, and it helps in packaging those crops. These all are either web portals. Some of them are messaging SMS. Some of them are calls. Now the next one is the non-governmental organization. As we can see, non-governmental organization has coming up, but not specifically touching to the uh, gray areas of the farmer that it needs. Some of the organization like MS Swaminathan's Research Foundation, Fisher Friend Mobile Advisory, these all help. Yet we came across, NGOs are not into farmers with helping them. They majorly focus on e-learning, helping them to educate themselves through various different languages. MS Swaminathan has been a very rustic and ancestral network which connects not only one part of uh, community but different markets, to set them together, to analyze, and even to, uh, to come together and help each other. The Fisher Friend Mobile Advisory is something different. It does not just helps agriculture, but it helps in horticulture, in the rural areas where fishing is important. So they help them through mobile phones. Now this is something different that we came across, that it helps the weather forecasting. They majorly focuses on wind and weathers. Next initiative was the private sector. Here, big private sectors like PepsiCo, Tata, Kisan, they not only uh, gives elite the products, but also helps in raw material for the farmers. They see to it that the farmers have the basic knowledge. The specialists come, they check through. This all happens via e-learning, by e-visiting. This all happens through ICT tools. PepsiCo too has been an elegant e-aggregate practices accessible. It helps it. 24 hours interfaces have been done. The major uh, validity that PepsiCo gives is the GPS power.
Sorry for the interruption. You just have 2 minutes. Yeah. Please conclude.
I'll keep it short. Varna and Chopal are one of those, and they provide a major stock issues even to farmers. Now, these are the comparative studies that we done, and we presented it through the charts. As you can see, the major factors that public sector gives is and focuses on all of this, because of which they lag somewhere, the government especially, whereas in NGOs e-learning have been focuses on, and as in private sectors they focus major on e-forecasting, the message services, and through call centers. Now, here's what the recommendation that we created: a particular ICT model that can connect three of them together via a web portal. We are working on those web portal. Several analysis reviews can be done, and this all three can be teamed up. So at the end of the day, the farmer is the one who will be benefited from there. Assessment, information dissemination, integration, infrastructure, and awareness. The major thing that we can do is awareness. So yes, that's all from my side.
Thank you. Sir, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Sachi, for your presentation. It is a quite informative presentation that you have given on government and non-government organizations that are providing ICT services to the agriculture. Okay, what do you think about the use of means? Is there any data where it is indicating that how many people are using, or how many farmers, people from the agriculture sectors are using these services?
Yes, when we came across through this analysis, we can connect through government, and we can come across this analysis how many farmers have been benefited. Same goes for NGOs, but when we come to private sectors, their data has been confidential. So yes, a lot of people use governmental sectors, just like I said, Agra market is one which has been used highly. And the second comes is MS Swaminathan's Research Center. That has been greatly used.
Right. Thank you, Sajid. Thank you for your presentation. Over to Devi.
Thank you, Sachi. Thank you. Our next presenter is Indranail. I have unmuted you. Yeah, you can start sharing your screen and begin your presentation.
Respected panelists, judges, and the members.
Your screen is not visible. Please share your presentation.
Yeah, I'll just share my presentation out here.
Yes, I'm able to see your screen now.
So,
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about something which is very prevalent in the current times, which is basically the cyber threats. Now, for the past over 1.5 years, we are working on a work from home, or what we call as the new normal. So there has been a tremendous shift. There has been a substantial shift from what kind of threats that used to come in the month of, say, 2000 first quarter or second quarter, to what is coming now. So it should be everyone should be well aware of that, what kind of landscape has changed. So what kind of threats are coming, what kind of threats are not coming. So hence this was the motivation behind writing this paper, that so that people can understand what kind of threats they should be looking around, and what are the threats which are happening at the present moment. So if you go to the take the, for example, the consideration of this pandemic, and what has made the pandemic so important, was no one was planning for it. So it was something which happened all of a sudden, and we went on to a lockdown, then we went on to unlocks and everything. And the normal is now, what has happened is we are all working from home. So working from home has become a normal scenario. Maybe nowadays some people are going to the offices and all that, but still it's something which is still a pandemic scenario which we are trying to make sure in having it. But what has happened is, when you're working from home, you're doing maximum work. Say it may be your work which you have allotted, maybe your banking, everything you're doing it from your home systems. Now, how safe are those systems, or what are the different types of attacks that are happening? Now, whenever we do these kind of things, we say, okay, I have a system and I don't have to worry about it. But in India, how many of us really buy the antivirus? How many of us really upgrade our operating system, upgrade our antivirus regularly? How many of us change the password of our online profiles? For example, Gmail accounts. How many of us change it, say, every 30 days? How many of us change banking password? Unless otherwise we have been told, we usually do not do. How many of us have a two-way, two-point verification of each and every account that we have? We usually don't do it. The reason being is we say nothing will happen. And we say, no, I have antivirus, it will save me. So that is the very point which needs to be understood. We are reluctant in doing those changes. Hence, we become a party of being violated. So what happens is there are people who call them hackers. They hack into a system because they know, suppose I have 6 accounts and I use the same password for all the 6 accounts. If I know one account, I can obviously I can breach all the 6 accounts, and they can take all kinds of data from those accounts. Now, these are something which we need to keep in mind. So we have to change ourselves first. That what are the things? So before we can change ourselves, let's look into what are the things what are happening in this particular COVID scenario. What kind of attacks are happening in the cyberspace? So cybersecurity scams are happening everywhere. So ransomware is something which is happening very much. First is what government facilities, then you have healthcare, and wherever you can, they are jamming up. Even there is in India, we have the Cognizant Technology Solution. They were also attacked by the ransomware. So it's a very big IT giant, yet it fell for a ransomware account. So these things are happening. So we have cybersecurity teams who are working day and night. But the only problem, or the major problem that we faced, was before the COVID scenario came in, the amount of money that was given to these taking care of these kind of attack scenarios was much less than what is invested by these companies nowadays. So we'll see into it. So there are many cybersecurity considerations which are there. So we need to align business goals with security needs. So it has to be, we have to understand what are the business goals we are trying to assign. And when we are trying to get to those business goals, the security needs to be aligned along with it. You have to digitally trust your consumers as well as the people who are working for you. How you do it? You can create a VPN, you can have a 2-point authentication. So you have to do it. You need to have a evolving security team. That means they need to understand what is happening and what is not happening day in, day out. So they cannot say that, no, we know this much that we work around it. And every day they have to understand there are all kinds of different regulations which are coming in to protect our systems. One of the weakest protection that we have at the present moment all over the world is cloud. So cloud, we say that I am storing my documentation in the cloud. This COVID has brought in that we are storing everything in our cloud. So cloud does not mean that it is safe. So cloud is the weakest thing we are having at that time. So I will show you few slides that cloud attacks have become something which is very highly now during the 2021. And also we need to automate security functions, which we are not doing. So if you look at the last 3 years into perspective, you will find that the amount of attacks which have happened in 2021 is far more than. So these are number of attacks which are happening per month. So this is 240 breaches which has happened in April itself. So these are some of the attack breaches which are happening all over the world. And these are the data which have been collected from different sources all over the world, so that they have been accumulated. So number of breaches during this time, it was much lesser. But as soon as
Sorry for the interruption, Andrei, you just have 2 minutes to conclude with the presentation. So I think you can keep it short and
I'll bring it.
explain the important points.
So these are the breaches which we are happening. Then if you look at what motivates these hackers, so activism is something which is there, which actually motivates some part of it, but crime is something which is there. So computer can be used as a tool, or it can be used as a method of doing a crime. So we have cyber crime as a maximum which are happening for the last during this pandemic scenario. We have espionage which is very high. We have warfare which is there, which is very small, but activism is much lesser. So if you take us to types of attacks which was happening, so versus 20 to 2021, malware went down, but account hijacking, vulnerabilities, this unknown is also there, which is usually your ransomware attacks. This keep on growing. So these were few of the things which started to grow when we are seeing 2021. So the attack vectors have changed in 2021 compared to 2020. So that is something we need to worry about. So what were the targets? So if you look at the targets, we had arts and entertainment, wholesale, retail, manufacturing, professional, financial institutes. Educational institute got attacked because they were all trying to teach from home. This was online education was there. So educational institute was started to hit. You have health is there, public administration is there. So there was a shift of major targets which happened during the pandemic. In 2021, something which came out which was very important was percentage of cloud threats. So there was a huge amount of cloud threats which were coming up during this 2021. So they were trying to get how the delivery exploitation was there, the commands and control were there. All was due to things like weak passwords, or they did not have enough solution of it. And you will be amazed to see AWS is as the one of the services which is the highest people use it, but that is the weakest. So it's around 61.3% time AWS is attacked compared to Microsoft Azure, Data, Bitbucket, and others if you can continue on. But AWS is the always attacked to get some threats. So that is a very important. So if you have an AWS server, you have to have proper infrastructure built so that you can do it. Now, in India also we had huge breaches till April. So if you look at in April 25th April, we got the big basket that came to light. Now it was reported, actually not came to light, but it was reported in April. It was big basket. Some 11 million data were of big basket customers were released. You have Upstock. It was a mobile app which used to be done. You can do stock trading. Their data were leaked. Z5 and OTT platform, all their data were leaked. Airtel, around 14 million data were leaked. So you can understand these are very big names in the market which people were using to order their daily things. They were doing stock trading. They were seeing different keep upsells, and those data were revealed by the hackers. So these were the major breaches which happened in just 4 months of 2021, and it costs each of the companies a huge amount of money.
Andrei, please conclude. Please.
Yeah, I'm concluding. So whatever we do, so we have to think of the security of these digital devices. We have to move from free antivirus to say proper antiviruses, software vulnerability auditing has to be done. And we have to keep understanding about the data breach investigation and educate ourselves and others to safeguard it from them. And please remember one thing, there is no perfect protection. There is no perfect protection. I have updated antivirus, I have updated operating system. It does not mean you're protected. It means, yes, you're somewhat protected, but vulnerability will always be there. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. If you have any questions,
Thank you and congratulations, Mr. Indranil, for picking up such an important topic of this present time. I really happy to see the numbers that you have shown, that from all the studies that whatever the graph and graphs that you have prepared, they are really informative. Indranil sir, I have one question.
yes, sir.
Say for individual person, like as I'm using my mobile and from mobile I'm doing all the things. Yeah, as you said, yes, people are not going to the banks now. They are doing all their banking on mobile. Okay. And I really do not care about whether I have installed the antivirus, whether my instrument is protected from the viruses or not. Okay. So in this scenario, what can be the solutions which can be started from say because see at national level, geographically, if I just look at the country, our country, it may not be able to start from the central level, but it has to be made that you have to start something on the pockets, on the small zones. Okay. So what can be the strategy for doing that thing? Say, is it necessary for every person to buy on his own that security? Can't it be provided centrally by someone or maybe government?
Banking solutions from our mobile phones, simple Android mobile phones. We have to make sure that we are downloading the My Banking app from the particular bank's authorized link. That is very important. So in the Google Play, there are hundreds of links which are there, which are similar, but we have to check whether it is, suppose for example, I'm downloading IDBI Bank app. It has to be from an ID, it's always written IDBI Bank, that who is the author of that particular app. So it has to be an IDBI, not say myself or not someone else. It has to be an IDBI. And whenever we download and we try to use it, always we have to switch on two-level authentication. That means just not having your phone should not be, they should also need to have that second SMS should come to your device, that your password along with that second level authentication, you should be allowed to enter to the banking app. Now, once you are doing it, it's some kind of protection, but I'm not saying it's a 100% protection. Obviously, someone who is sitting just beside you might look into it that, okay, you have a banking and this is the same mobile, you are having the as your mobile phone as your banking app. So, okay, I will next time I'll steal that phone and I know that whatever security key code you have it on them. So that can be obviously there. So, but if you can have it on two different devices, because banks, maximum banks which are there in India, they do not pass usually the US level of test. So NIST.gov, it's an US site which is there, who tells that which banking app is safe. India's no banking app is safe. No wallet is safe as per them. So we need to be careful. So more we are careful, more will make us safe.
Thank you, Mr. Indranil, for your nice presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Divyendu. Yeah, I've unmuted you. Are you able to hear me?
Hello?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can start sharing your screen and begin with the presentation. Please keep in mind about the time, as we have parallel sessions going on. So we need to be on time. So
Yeah.
just
Is my
keep it
screen?
short, and important points could be, brought up.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah. So hello everyone. Good afternoon. So my name is Dibyendu. I work in TCS Kolkata, and the co-author of this presentation is Reshmita Shil. She is a assistant professor in Techno Main Salt Lake, that's the engineering college situated in Kolkata. So today we are going to talk about optimum route computation in a chaotic artificial climbing wall. So climbing wall, that is a kind of adventure sports, as all you know. So today we are going to cover the rock climbing introduction, the types of rock climbing, the artificial wall climbing basics, and current motivation of our work, the proposed system architecture, what we have done so far, the result and the issues, and how you are going to minimize those issues, the next work we are going to do, and then we will take any questions if there is any. Okay. So let's start. So rock climbing is a adventure sport. So rock climbing, traditional rock climbing is done on a natural wall. So the right side, left side picture, you are saying that me being climbing a wall. So there all the holes, all the objects are not predictable. So all the dangers and the holes, all the footholds, handholds, body movement, everything is chaotic. So this gives a climber a new challenges when he is climbing. And in the right side, that is an artificial wall. So for your information, my son is climbing, the wall is situated in my home. So in this wall, all the holes are placed in such a fashion that whenever a climber is climbing, he can predict, okay, I will take this route, there are certain footholds and handholds within his or her reach, and he can climb it. So this is a predictive kind of wall, and whereas natural wall, everything is in chaotic. So now let's talk something about the artificial wall. Artificial wall, if you see, this is a moon board. Moon board is a board where all the holes are placed in a matrix fashion. So all the distance between two holes are around 10 to 8 inch. In that distance, the holes are placed. The artificial holes are made of a material that is called epoxy, and there are few types of holes: jug holes, corner holes, roof holes, pinch hole. There are various types of hole, and that is placed in a matrix fashion, and climber finds a way to, as per his convenience. There is no such proper method which tells climber that you take this route and that route. So everything is intuitive and based on climber's judgment. So our motivation of the work was, so can we create a algorithm which in a board, a short climber and a tall climber that is suitable, that will cater the climbing route for both short and tall climbers. Like when a short climber is climbing, he will take a route A, and algorithm say for a long climber, he will compute a different route. So in order to achieve that, what we have done, so first we have created a program which is creating random hold, and random hold is nothing but a random coordinate. And then we considered the stride length of a climber. So stride length is proportional to the height of the climber. Then we have determined the adjacent hold based on the stride length, and we have repeated these steps for multiple times for each of the holds. So first is our random hold generation. So in this experiment, we have considered a 10 feet by 4 feet climbing board, and this blue colored coordinates are nothing but randomly we have generated through a program, and we have placed scattered on the hold. So next comes the stride. Stride is a very important in this, because whenever a climber is a 6 feet, his stride length is something, and whenever a climber is say 3 feet or 4 feet, the stride length becomes less. Stride length is nothing but the distance between when we walk, the distance between our heel and a toe, from the heel of left leg to toe of the right leg. Now, what we have done for computing the adjacent hold, so we have taken one hold and we found the distance of all the holds from that hold, and we have taken 70% of the stride length as a minimum distance between two holds, and stride length is the maximum distance between two holds. That means whenever any holds come between 70% or 100% of the stride length, we will consider these holds for a suitable climbing hold for that climber. Why we have given 70%? Because if we reduce this number to 30% or 40%, the holds will be very nearer, and that will not give enough challenge to the climber. So to avoid the monotonous thing in the climbing, we have considered 70%. So then we have repeated these steps for all the holds, and finally each of the coordinate is the vertices of a graph, and the distance between from one hold to another is the edge of the graph. So like that, we have computed a properly a graph, and in this example, you are seeing from hold 0 to hold 20, the vertices are 0 and 20, and the edge is 0.20 and 0, and the distance between 0.0 to 0.20 is 28. So like that, we have computed all the distances between
sorry for the interruption. You just have 2 minutes left. Please
yes,
keep it short
yes.
and conclude. Yeah.
Yes. So we have applied Digitro's shortest path algorithm to compute the shortest path. So in this example, 0.23 is the lowest point, and 0.12 is the highest point of our climbing board. So if in this example, if you are seeing, so for a 60-inch climber, from 0.23 to 0.12, it takes around 174-inch distance with a 8 hop count, whereas a 6 feet climber, 72-inch climber, the same becoming 5 hop and 131 inch. So like that, we have computed a shortest path. So this is the example of the shortest route. These are all the points which we scattered randomly on the climbing board, and our program, our algorithm has computed 0.23 to 0.12. This path will be the shortest path for the climber. Now, so this is giving you the essence of the shortest path. Next, this algorithm is also giving us the insight of all the possible climbing routes that can be taken by the climber in that climbing board. So these are the possible climbing routes and the number of hops. So now, because of shortage of time, I'll just keep it short. We have also computed the difficulty level. Difficulty level depends on three things: deviation of the route from the shortest route. So whenever the number of hop is increasing, we can say the difficulty level is increasing. When the number of hops are decreasing and route distance are increasing, that then also we can say the difficulty level of that route is increasing. There are three things that is we have considered to compute the difficulty level. So this is kind of graphical representation. So more number of hops means route getting difficult, more the distance, getting the climbing route getting difficult. Okay. So that is pretty much this. We have done the implementation using Python and NetworkX, and ongoing enhancement is we are computing the difficulty level. Like I said, there are several types of climbing holds, corner holds, roof holds, jug holds, pinch holds. So what is the effect of holds when we are positioned in the climbing boards? How it is affecting to the difficulty level? That is the thing that we are working on currently. And also we are trying to get the data from some of the moon boards which is being used worldwide, and we want to compare the moon board data with our implementation. That is the work we are doing it now. So we'll certainly come with some enhancement ideas. So that is pretty much about the optimum route climb computation in a artificial climbing wall. So if there is any questions, we will take it up.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dibendu.
Yep.
For this your artificial climbing and based on optimization. Yeah, there as you already will be doing it in the future, that comparing it with the existing optimization methods, that how this method is working well with the other methods. Okay, so that is a really important step to actually establish this work, right? Comparison is required.
Yes, yes.
So best wishes from me, and thank you for your presentation. Over to Deepika.
Thank you so much. Our next presenter is Sneha Prasad. I've unmuted you.
Yes, hello, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, just a second. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah, please keep it short and simple and conclude with the important points. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sneha Prasad. I am a final year student of Electronics and Telecommunication Department from Symbiosis International University, Pune. The paper I'm presenting here is titled as Frequency Reconfigurable Patch Antenna for 5G application. This will be the agenda. I'll tell a brief introduction about what is reconfigurability and what is frequency reconfigurable antenna, and then we'll move ahead with the design, result, and conclusion. That's it. We are using 5G communication here. So since today's world is growing wireless, and with the emerging concept of this 5G technology, flexible antennas are being preferred over other existing technologies. And the antenna design that is presented in this paper is a compact size multi-band frequency reconfigurable antenna for wireless applications with a simple line feed using FR4 epoxy as the substrate. So reconfigurable antennas are basically an antenna that has the capability of modifying features like frequency, radiation, etc. In a very controlled and reversible way. So there are different types of reconfiguration antenna, including frequency, pattern, polarization, hybrid, etc. And we are focusing on frequency. So frequency reconfigurable antennas can basically adjust their frequency of operations dynamically, and is useful in situations where several communication systems converge because multiple antennas are required. So this can be replaced by a single reconfigurable antenna, and this can be obtained by a smooth shift between the operating bands, etc. And this can be done using switching mechanisms. These are the few of the switching mechanisms, and we are mainly focusing on pin diode, since it is very reliable and it is the most common choice of reconfiguration. And the other two are Varactor and RF MEM, which is basically a radio frequency microelectromechanical system. So they all have their own advantage and disadvantage. So this is the methodology of implementation for any antennas. So first we need to determine the specifications and the parameters. Then we need to assign the microstrip. And then after that, we need to determine the impedance matching between the microstrip and the patch antenna. Then we need to introduce the switches, and if once we simulate it in the software, it can be, here I'm using the HFSS software. So once we simulate it, if we are getting the optimum result, then well and good, we can move ahead for fabrication. If not, then we need to go back and then start from the second step. So here I got the optimum result after 16 to 17 iteration. So yes, so here is the design of our frequency reconfigurable antenna. So as you can see, the substrate size, that is, substrate is the yes. So substrate size is the main ground plane. Then we have the substrate, then we have the patch. So substrate size is 60 cross 60 mm, while the patch width and length is mentioned. All the dimensions are mentioned in this table. So it is, the substrate is made of FR4 epoxy with a thickness of 1.6 mm and a dielectric constant of 4.4. So as you can see, there are three different slots. There's basically two sections, but three different slots you can see here. So this basically can be coupled through capacitors. So these are the capacitors. These small cubes are the capacitors, and this can be de-linked or linked with each other using diodes. And these red ones are the diodes, that is the pin diode, which we are using. So here the concept of electrical length is taken into use so as to improve the overall efficiency, and its working capabilities were further enhanced. And this was enhanced by adding these biasing circuit, which is comprehended in the next slide. Yes, so as you can see my cursor, yeah. So this is the biasing circuit or blocking circuit, as you can see, which is given in the here in the zoomed in form. So here the blocking capacitor, which is the C, so it works and the concept of blocking DC, and thereby it prevents the increased bias of any of the pin diodes. And there is this choke inductor, which is the L. So here it allows the DC, but it blocks the AC current. So when the diode is forward biased, any DC signal that changes the biasing is blocked by the capacitor, while any AC signal that changes the biasing is blocked by the choke inductor. So after incorporating the pin diode, we can see that the electrical length is changing. Is changing, and as you can see in this figure of the RLC equivalent circuit of RF pin diode, you can see that when the diode is in forward bias, that is on condition, the inductor and resistor are in series, while when it is in off condition or reverse biased, it is in parallel. The resistor and capacitor is in parallel state. So when it is in parallel state, what happens is that the capacitance block the current and no current will flow in this position, and it works as an open circuit. Now coming to the result. So once I simulated it, we got the result. So first result was the S parameter or the return loss. So return loss basically validates the frequency reconfiguration for different state of diode frequencies ranging from, as you can see, 6.2 to 21.3 gigahertz for on condition, while 14.1 to 26 gigahertz for off condition. And so on the on condition, that is the dominant frequency being 6.2 gigahertz was had a return loss of minus 42 dBi. While for off condition, the dominant frequency was about 26.1 with a return loss of minus 39.96 dBi. So high return loss is always appreciated. Now the next result is gain. So gain is measured. Gain measured is at a peak of 4.86 dBi for the on condition. That is when both D1 and D2 are in on condition. However, the gain measured when during off is, as mentioned here, it is 6.28. Now, this is basically a directional antenna with a main lobe being at the positive Z direction. Yeah, being at the positive Z direction. And it basically indicates that the antenna is able to convert input power into radio waves headed in a specified direction. Now, the next result which we got is the radiation pattern. It basically represents the emission or the reception of the wavefront at the antenna. Hence, it will specify its strength. So in this, you can see that at phi equal to 0 degree, for on state, we are getting a pencil beam for a frequency of 20 gigahertz, while for off state, we are getting a lobe, that is a major lobe is pointing towards the positive direction, while the minimum towards the back lobe, that is a negative direction. Now, after that, we have tabulated all the performance of the antenna, that is the efficiency, gain, bandwidth, etc., for all the frequencies for the on condition, for all the frequencies basically in this tabular form. And here we have also plotted the current distribution. So for the current distribution, you can see that the concept of the electrical length, which I explained before using the pin diode. Here you can see the on condition, there are 2 pin diodes, and here there are no pin diodes since it is in the off condition. So the current distribution is more here, that is 9.411 dBi, while in the off condition, it's just 4.815. So here we can prove that the simulated result is giving that exact concept of electrical length is explained here. Now, the last plot which we found was frequency versus gain plot. So here you can see that there are 2 peaks, 25.6 and 25.4, which has a gain of 10.7 and 6.4 respectively. So this plot basically proves that the 3D polar plot which we got, which was the gain plot here, and the efficiency that is obtained, that is this one, is basically proved in this, and it basically shows that the gain is always positive for this antenna, which that means it works in the perfect condition. Now, to conclude, as a future scope, we thought of adding a bit of artificial intelligence and IoT to this antenna, which can give a major boost across industries like immersive gaming and improved retail experiences, etc. So such antennas can reduce the size and complexity and especially the cost of an antenna, and can facilitate increasingly in the future generation of mobile and wireless communication systems. So to conclude, this is just a brief of what we did. So we used the HFSS software. We used FR4 epoxy as the substrate material, and a pin diode was used for switching. And these are the frequency ranges for on and off condition. And we also saw that it gave a good impedance bandwidth and a positive gain, which is useful for the future application in the 5G arena. But we were not able to fabricate it which was supposed to be done in the DRDO, at the DRDO in Pune, because of the ongoing lockdown. So we are hoping to do that in the future again. That's it. These are a few of the references we refer to, and that's it. Thank you from my side. Open for questions.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you for sharing your work in this conference. It is really nice presentation. You have done quite a simulation work, and
Thank you,
my
sir.
wishes to you for your hardware implementation. I have one quick question regarding the bandwidth.
Yes, sir.
The bandwidth of the 5G connections that what you are saying is very huge. Right?
Yes, sir. Actually, after 16 iterations, we were getting a bandwidth. The bandwidth which I mentioned was actually the percentage of the bandwidth, which is 2.2 and 2.3, which we were getting. The highest we got was 3.5, which is high, but then the gain and the efficiency with that same bandwidth was coming to be approximately 97%. So that's why we went ahead with it. But while fabricating it, it might change. I have a feeling it will change. Yes, but the efficiency we were getting very good.
Now I have a second question.
Yes.
In the existing telecommunication infrastructure, can that be used? The same infrastructure can be used for that bandwidth. Say that whatever the number that you have said, if we go with that, will it be useful?
It can be useful if we are using just for the 5G application. So this is only for 5G application, right? So for 5G, if we look at the frequency bandwidth and the frequency range, if we see that, we can see that it's going to a very increased range. The range is quite high. So I think for this particular antenna, if you're only looking for 5G, then we can use it. But if we are looking for less than that, or we have to improvise it, of course. So
No, no, no. I'm not talking about this antenna. I'm saying that if I'm using this antenna, right?
Yes,
to,
yes.
To transmit the your data,
Yes.
right, 5G data on my existing infrastructure.
Yes, we can use it, Abhi. We can use it for now. We can use it because in India, the bandwidth and the frequency range which was given was the slot which we took is around 20. For us, it is 26 gigahertz, but in the slot which is provided in India, it is somewhere between 20 to 28. So we can use it.
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right.
Joy, you wanted to ask something? Any question from the participant? Okay, over to Deepika.
Thank you so much.
Hello, am I audible, Deepika? But you are not audible to me.
Yes, yes, you're audible to me and your screen is also visible. Yeah, you can start with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Deepika.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Sangeeta Patil from GH Raisoni College of Engineering and Management, Pune, with my co-author Lakshman Madharao Wagmari from SGGS Nanded, presenting the research on intelligently trained Elman neural network, best maximum power point tracking for photovoltaic system. So the content of this research is abstract, introduction, what are the objective, methodology, result and discussion, conclusion. So in this research, what is done, the analysis is conducted to observe the control strategy for the PV generator, which is connected to the grid, and we have to facilitate with the maximum power point tracking, that is the MPPT control unit. Again, the DC to DC boost converter is used here to increase the voltage at the required voltage level at the converter side, converter input side. And in addition to that, the boost amplifier, which enables the tracing of MPP, that is the maximum power point for the PV panels, it is used. So for MPP, I have used the Elman neural network, which is trained online and designed to track the effective and excellent maximum operating power point of the PV generator. So by using the Elman neural network, what I am getting is the better steady state and the stable response with the reduced fluctuation near the maximum power point as compared to the conventional algorithm, that is the perturb and observe algorithm. So I have implemented this in the MATLAB 2019. So I will start with the introduction. What is the need of the renewable energy sources today? So as the integration of the distributed energy resources like PV, wind energy generator, fuel cells into the distribution network is receiving the greater attention due to their several benefits. What are their benefits in comparison to the classical centralized energy generators? These sources are clean, durable, then they have zero fossil fuel emissions, and they are widely used for various applications in the distributed generation. So I have considered the only one source when I have applied the Elman neural network for the MPPT. And in my future work, I am going to add the other renewable energy sources, that is wind, fossil, solid oxide fuel cell with the battery storage. So what is PV panel? PV panel, all of you know us, it is consist of the PV cells which are connected in series and parallel, and they convert the photon energy into the electrical energy by means of the photovoltaic effect. But the point to that we have to note here, the power versus voltage electrical characteristics of a PV source is a non-linear and depend on weather condition that causes the irregular power generation. Hence, we need the maximum power point tracking for the PV generator. So it has been of main interest to associate the maximum power point tracking control unit with each PV generator so that it will force that PV generator to operate continuously at the optimal operating point under the changing weather conditions. So in the literature survey, I have referred the numerous research paper, and those paper have focused main on their MPPT control issue. And what is the main goal of every research is the to main goal is to increase the efficiency and increase the efficiency in spite of variation in the weather conditions. So in this research, the DC-DC boost converter is used here to step up the terminal voltage of the PV source to the desired voltage level at the inverter side. And this boost converter only is performing the tracking of optimum operating point of the PV array and ensuring the maximum power generation. So whatever the literature I have gone through, many MPPT's methods are comparing their research with the perturb and observe, which is very conventional algorithm. So in P&O algorithm, what it is doing at every iteration stage.
Sangeeta, you also need to present the slides. It's just at the introduction place.
Yes. So the objective of my research paper is, first of all, do the PV generator modeling. Then I will explain the DC to DC boost converter control scheme. Then how I have tracked the maximum power point generation for high power generation. Then operation of, or I have checked the test. I have done the testing of the Elman neural network for various weather conditions. So
you have just 4 minutes, almost 4-5 minutes.
Yeah.
Please keep that in mind.
PV generator modeling I will skip. I will come to the DC to DC boost converter. So DC boost converter is to step up the terminal voltage at the desired level. In this study, online trained Elman neural network is proposed here to determine the PV generator voltage reference, which corresponds to the optimal operating point of the PV source. And whatever the adopted MPPT control is here, it is a modified version of online trained Elman neural network, which is proposed in the reference number 2 of my slides. And the control objective here is to enhance the tracking performance of your standard P&O algorithm in terms of the convergence speed as well as the static power fluctuation that we are getting. So, this is the, so here inputs to the ENN tracker are the change of your PV output current, PV out power generation, whereas the output is nothing but your PV voltage reference, which is generated. And the voltage error between the measured and the reference value is regulated by the PI controller here in order to generate the signal for the PWM control of the boost converter. So typically, what is Elman neural network? Just in 1 minute, I will tell you. Elman neural network is nothing but dynamic recurrent neural network that consists of 4 layers instead of 3: input layer, hidden layer, context layer, and output layer. ENN MPPT controller block is implemented in the MATLAB. An example of implementation of an online measurement of the weights of extraction layer is studied, and that is studied under variable weather conditions. So this is the MATLAB, and this is adjustment of the weights I have shown in the figure. So to ensure the operation of online trained Elman neural network controller, various weather conditions I have taken into account, and those are implemented in MATLAB. So in the result, the proposed MPPT is modeled and tested for climate change and the variable load requirements. So 3 conditions I have taken. First test is conducted under constant weather conditions. So here I have considered temperature as 27 degrees Celsius, solar irradiance as 1000 watt per meter square, and variable load conditions where initial state of charge of my battery energy storage system is used for backup, that is moderate. I have taken 70%. So the point of maximum output of PV is quickly achieved using the Elman neural network. So blue line is showing you the results of the Elman neural network, and red is showing you the results of P&O, that is perturb and observe algorithm. So I have compared these both algorithms. So using Elman neural network controller, I am getting the better result. Yeah? And whatever the results I am getting, that I have maximize for some few seconds to compare with ENN and P&O. Then second case that I have taken as variable irradiation and the load situation, means load is also variable and irradiation are also variable. So, but the temperature is constant. So at a sustained temperature of 25 degrees Celsius, the sun's rays vary during the experimentation that I have done. And here the proposed MPPT guarantee the good tracking efficiency of changing the radiation levels. And at each level of sun rays, my Elman neural network finds the PV power reference accurately, and due to which the performance of the model is better. Using the developed Elman neural network, I am getting the acceptable and stable condition by reducing the variation near the maximum power point. You can see here the red one is with the Elman neural network with less variation, and blue one with the P and O algorithm. If I'm taking the time scale of more, then I cannot compare the both Elman neural network and P and O. That is why I have zoomed some certain time period. Then during third experimental simulation, the temperature I have slowly varied from 34 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius, and gradually I have decreased it from 27 to 21 degrees Celsius at a constant irradiation of 800 watt per meter square, as shown in the figure. And this figure shows me the supremacy of my online trained Elman neural network when matched with the P and O. It is observed that for short-term response, I am getting the stable condition with the Elman neural network compared to the P and O algorithm. So the conclusion is nothing but the proposed, whatever I have proposed Elman neural network, which is used for the tracking the maximum power point, it exhibits the good tracking performance in comparison to the conventional P and O tracker, and the automatic flexibility of the learning curve during the online training of that Elman neural network ensures me the fast integration rate of the backpropagation algorithm, hence error as well as the power fluctuation during the steady states are eliminated. So these are the references that I have used. So thank you. Any questions, sir?
Yes. Thank you, Sangeeta. A nice
Thank you,
presentation. I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Can you please justify your selection of Elman neural network? Okay, for your this PV controller. What is the reason why you have chosen that?
Actually, first of all, I have tried the P and O algorithm. But what is the why I have used the ANN? Because ANN has a benefits of adaptability, parallelism, and it has ability to handle the non-linearity, which is not observed in the P and O algorithm when I have tried it in the MATLAB.